Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. In the deepest chasms of the webway, where suns do not shine and screams echo like prayers, there sits a figure so wrapped in myth, so drenched in dread, that even the most jaded of inquisitors hesitate to speak his name. He is not a warlord of noble bearing, nor a demigod clad in ceramite and glory. He is Asdrubael Vect, lord of the cabal of the Black Heart, supreme overlord of Camara, and perhaps the most dangerous individual to have ever lived. Not because of brute strength or supernatural powers, but because he understands the soul of darkness and has made it kneel before him. To call Vect a tyrant is to call a black hole merely dark. He is the architect of cruelty, a man who shaped an entire culture around sadism, betrayal, and domination, not merely surviving in it, but bending it to his every whim. In a galaxy ruled by monsters, gods, and living storms, Vect's danger lies in something far more terrifying than warp sorcery or divine wrath. He is a master of systems. He sees the threads of power, of hate, of desire, and he pulls them with precision, making others dance, kill, and die, all while he watches from a throne built on ancient bones. He does not need to raise a weapon, because the entire Drukhari race is his blade. Now let's dive into how a low-born slave rewrote the laws of a dying empire and became the dark heart of its resurrection. In the choking mire of Comarog's underlevels, where the air is thick with chem fumes and the screams of the forgotten rise like steam, Asdrubael Vect was born with no name, no pedigree, and no future. He was not hatched from the noble lineages of ancient craft worlds, nor elevated by the sorcery of the old empire. He was filth, one of the millions pressed beneath the lacquered boots of the aristocratic archons who ruled the City of Knives. But Vect was no ordinary drudge. From the very beginning, he understood something the highborn did not. That power was not inherited, it was taken. The Komarov into which Vect emerged was a rotting carcass, gilded with excess and clotted with stagnant cruelty. The highborn ruled from glittering spires, their dynasties bloated on millennia of exploitation and mutual loathing. Vect worked as a menial, a corpse scraper in one version of the tale, a soul collector in another, perhaps even a servant in a gladiatorial arena. The legends contradict each other because Vect ensured they would. He obscured his origins behind layers of lies, restructured every narrative, and turned even his own past into a weapon of myth. What matters is that he watched. He observed how the upper echelons clung to their illusions of control while tearing each other apart in endless vendettas. Somewhere in those murderous gutters, Vect learned to weaponize ambition. He built a cult of personality before the term even existed in Drukhari culture. He whispered to others in the shadows, offering them what they wanted most: revenge, freedom, power. He didn't promise justice, because such a concept is foreign in the Dark City. He offered opportunity, and that was a language every gutterkin understood. Through manipulation, assassination, and the quiet orchestration of disappearances, Vect began his slow rise. He forged alliances among other low-born factions, street gangs, minor cabals, twisted Xenos mercenaries, and even rogue homunculi. He used them as pawns, then disposed of them with surgical precision when their usefulness ended. He did not play the game of Camara's elite. He rewrote the rules entirely. And those who mocked him for his birth would one day find their names etched on soul tokens hanging from his throne. His greatest coup came when he unveiled the ultimate hypocrisy of the ruling houses, that they were stagnant, feeding on the rituals of their ancestors while pretending at supremacy. Vect triggered a chain of assassinations and scandals that collapsed the trust between the ancient highborn houses. Rumors flew like shuriken of hidden heresies, of pacts with Slaneshi cults, of forbidden acts committed in the depths of Komara's pleasure gardens. None of it was true, or all of it was. The only truth that mattered was that Vect made the elite fear each other more than they feared him. And then came the act that shattered the social order. Vect presented to the city the petrified remains of a noble archon and declared himself the avenger of the lowborn, the instrument of cleansing. His enemies laughed until their airlocks failed, their slaves rebelled, and their palaces turned into execution chambers. One by one, the ruling houses fell, not to open war, but to precision strikes, internal collapses, and betrayals they never saw coming. Vect did not march to power. He was pulled upward by a tide of blood and chaos he had orchestrated years in advance. When the smoke cleared, there was no formal coronation, no ancient rite. There was only him, standing alone in the empty council chamber of the Arcanite elite, his eyes cold and calculating. He had not inherited power. He had stolen it so thoroughly that no one could remember what the city had been before him. He kept the title lowborn for years afterward, a spit in the face of tradition. And in doing so, he established a precedent not just for rebellion, but for transcendence through cruelty. Vect's rise was not merely the ascent of a tyrant. It was the rebirth of Kamara under a new law. The law of domination, where worth is measured only in the fear you inspire and the lies you survive. The cabal of the Black Heart was not just born from ambition, it was sculpted from vengeance, fear, and an exquisite understanding of depravity. It was Vect's answer to the hollowness of Kamara's nobility, a new order hewn from the bones of the old. The moment he seized power, he did not simply declare dominion. He erected a living machine of terror, loyalty, and paranoia. The first true cabal, and the template upon which all others would be modeled. The Black Heart was not a faction. It was a mirror of Vect's soul, cold, calculating, endlessly hungry. Unlike the scattered warbands and noble houses that preceded it, the cabal of the Black Heart was a unified force, bound not by bloodlines but by ideology, absolute loyalty to Vect, and the promise of shared dominance over Kamara. To join was to surrender individuality, but also to ascend beyond the cutthroat games of lesser archons. Vect offered stability, not through mercy, but through predictability. Serve well, and you prosper. Fail, and you die quickly. Betray, and you suffer in ways that redefine the term. The cabal was structured like a pyramid of knives. At the top stood Vect, unchallengeable, omnipresent, a spider at the center of a web so vast that no one could see its outer strands. Beneath him, layers of lieutenants, enforcers, and spies jostled for position, knowing full well that any misstep would be noted, remembered, and exploited. Vect watched all. His eyes were everywhere, in the slums, in the gladiator pits, in the pleasure cults, even in rival cabals where his infiltrators fed him secrets like sacrificial offerings. What made the Black Heart different was its terrifying efficiency. While other cabals wallowed in decadence or wasted their strength on flamboyant raids, Vect's forces operated with surgical precision. Their real space assaults were swift and brutal, maximizing soul harvests while minimizing losses. Every raid was a performance, a blood-slick ballet of slaughter, choreographed for maximum agony and maximum spectacle. The spoils, pain tokens, captives, forbidden technologies were meticulously cataloged and funneled back into Kamara to feed the insatiable hunger of the city and its ruler. The aesthetic of the Black Heart was deliberate, too. Unlike the garish displays of some cabals, Vect's warriors wore sleek armor etched with arcane runes, their blades humming with dark energy. Their vehicles, shaped like predators in mid-lunge, moved in perfect formation. Even their torture rituals followed patterns, ritualized suffering that elevated pain to something almost holy. They were not berserkers. They were the embodiment of discipline, weaponized sadism encased in formality. Where other Drukhari reveled in chaos, Vect's cabal refined it. This disciplined terror gave the Black Heart a brutal advantage. Other cabals, for all their pride, came to respect or fear its superiority. Even the most defiant archons knew that crossing Vect invited extinction. Some tried anyway, of course. Ambition is the blood of Komarov, but none succeeded. Every rival who threatened the supremacy of the Black Heart vanished, either erased in midnight purges or publicly broken in the arenas, their screams recorded and replayed as warnings. And through it all, Vect remained the still center. He never raised his voice, never flinched. He did not need to. His cabal was an extension of his will. It was not a symbol of power. It was power. In time, the very idea of a cabal was redefined in his image. Lesser warlords mimicked his structure, trying to create their own versions of the Black Heart, but they were pale echoes. Vect's genius wasn't in organization alone. It was in the invisible network of debts, whispers, and obligations he wove through the cabal and into the city beyond. Even those who thought themselves free were caught in his schemes. Some cabals exist to conquer. The Black Heart exists to rule. And at the core of it all is an unshakable truth. The cabal of the Black Heart is not Kamara's strongest force because of numbers or weapons. It is the strongest because it is his. A perfect echo of a mind that sees every cruelty as a tool, every betrayal as currency, and every scream as a prayer to his dominion. Kamara is not a city. It is a wound in reality, a scar carved into the fabric of the webway, where agony clots like blood and cruelty is the atmosphere itself. It does not follow laws of geometry or physics. Its architecture is fractal madness. Its avenues lead both outward and inward, sometimes at the same time. And at its darkest heart, Asdrubael Vect reigns not merely as a tyrant, but as the architect of its current shape, both literal and metaphorical. Kamara, as it stands today, is the living embodiment of his vision, an empire of endless knives, always pointed inward. Once, Kamarag was a fragmented cluster of noble holdings, ancient shrines, crumbling fortresses, and parasitic pleasure dens, a squabbling mess of subrealms barely held together by custom and tradition. Each archon jealously guarded their domain, feeding off the suffering of others and waging silent wars that echoed through the webway like suppressed sobs. Vect changed all of that. He unified the city not through conquest, but through dependency. He became the nexus through which all power flowed. Every soul harvested, every raid into real space, every deal made with the homunculi covens, each was pulled into his web. Under Vect's reign, Kamara expanded beyond imagining. He brought together the disparate subrealm fragments, some willingly, others through slow, methodical extermination, and grafted them into a singular, writhing entity. It is now a megastructure that eclipses planets in size, but exists entirely within the labyrinthine tunnels of the webway. Some areas resemble Gothic cathedrals inverted into nightmares. Others are void-walked prisons for captured suns, places where gravity buckles and time screams. There are pleasure domes the size of continents where torment is refined into narcotic gas, and gladiatorial arenas that orbit black holes as monuments to nihilism. To live in Kamara is to live in constant awareness of suffering, yours and others. Pain is currency, betrayal is expected, trust is weakness, and this is exactly how Vect maintains control. He does not need an army to patrol the streets. The culture itself is his enforcer. He has engineered a society where everyone watches everyone else, where cabals and cults and covens sabotage each other just to avoid becoming prey themselves. Even his enemies contribute to his rule, too afraid of what might replace him to ever unite against him. At the literal center of the city, high above the writhing masses, lies the Dark Spire, Vect's personal fortress. It is said to be a dimensional anomaly, impossible to map and alive with ancient sentience. Within its walls, Vect walks among soul engines and data vaults containing the sins of 10,000 civilizations. He watches, he waits, he listens, and should any archon grow too bold, the Dark Spire's shadow falls long and sharp across their realm, often as a prelude to annihilation. But Kamarov is not merely sustained by Vect's vigilance. It is fed by the real space raids that bring in fresh bodies, fresh souls, fresh stories of agony. The city requires constant infusions of pain to maintain itself, a metaphysical addiction that mirrors the psychological sickness of its people. And so Vect ensures the supply never falters. He organizes and incentivizes the most brutal hunts, rewarding innovation in suffering and punishing inefficiency with oblivion. The result is a machine that eats galaxies and excretes horror. Even the webway itself is not safe from Vect's influence. He controls many of its hidden gates, bottlenecks that allow or restrict passage into and out of Kamara. This control is both political leverage and military power. No rival can fully escape his grasp. Every path they walk might already be compromised. Every escape plan anticipated decades before they conceived it. Kamarag is also filled with secrets, hidden fortresses, sealed labyrinths, ancient Eldari artifacts forgotten even by the craft worlds. Vect knows them all. He hoards knowledge like others hoard souls, and if a part of the city vanishes, a whole district swallowed by some warp-born anomaly or internal rebellion, it is often because Vect allowed it. Nothing happens in Kamara without his awareness, or worse, his permission. This is his true genius. He does not merely rule Kamara, he is Kamara. His paranoia is its architecture, his vengeance is its economy, his immortality is its curse. And as long as he sits atop the Black Spire, the Dark City will continue to seethe and expand, a tumor of cruelty growing in the heart of the webway. Pain is not just a sensation in Kamara. It is the currency of power, the language of dominance, and the rhythm by which the city breathes. But for Asdrubael Vect, pain transcends even these roles. It becomes philosophy. It becomes theology. It becomes art. He has not merely weaponized torment, he has refined it into a method of governance, a system of belief, a foundation upon which his reign eternally rests. Vect understands what most tyrants do not, that pain is not simply to be inflicted, it must be curated. The Drukhari thrive on suffering because it sustains them, delaying the soul thirst that haunts all of their kind. But Vect treats this biological necessity with aesthetic reverence. He sees pain as the key to controlling not just bodies, but minds. To him, every scream is data, every flinch a confession, every broken bone a line in a cosmic scripture he alone can read. His rule is not enforced through laws, but through memories of agony so profound that they alter the behavior of entire factions. Vect's genius lies in how he personalizes pain. His punishments are never arbitrary, they are surgical. An archon who dares defy him might find their lover slowly aged in reverse until they vanish as an infant. A homunculus who grows too bold may be kept in stasis for centuries, conscious and motionless, while his creations are dissected and mocked. A sybarite who steals from the wrong ledger might find their vocal cords harvested, reattached to a Xenos beast, and forced to scream in their voice for eternity in one of Kamara's countless menageries. The lesson is always clear. No transgression goes unseen, and no punishment is ever forgotten. This sadism isn't random, it serves a larger purpose. Pain becomes a tool of alignment, shaping the behavior of cabals and cults like an artisan carving runes into stone. Vect has created a culture in which to serve is to avoid suffering. Not because he offers kindness, but because he offers clarity. His enemies are chaotic. He is order, enforced not with compassion, but with precise cruelty. And in a world where nothing is sacred, that cold certainty becomes a kind of sanctuary. His private torture chambers are legendary even among the homunculi, who themselves are gods of mutilation. The rumors speak of libraries where the books are bound in living skin that moans when read, and of mazes constructed of nerve tissue harvested from angels and sorcerers alike. There are entire cathedrals where the faithful scream their prayers in pain, overseen by silent priestesses who once defied him and now know only reverence through agony. These are not myths. These are monuments, testaments to the idea that suffering is not an aberration, but a medium of divine expression. Even his military strategies reflect this belief. His raids are calculated to produce not just maximum soul yield, but maximum psychological devastation. He targets worlds that will break when struck. Shrines, orphanages, symbolically rich locations that ripple with cultural significance. He leaves survivors on purpose, to spread stories of horror, to infect hope with dread. And when entire systems begin to tremble at the thought of Kamara's shadow, Vect knows he has already won the battle, even before the first blade is drawn. This is why even his allies fear him more than his enemies. They know that the closer they stand to him, the more exquisitely crafted their potential fall becomes. Vect never forgets a slight. He stores grudges like treasures, polishing them with time until they gleam with opportunity. And when the time comes to settle accounts, the pain delivered is not mere revenge. It is performance. But what elevates Vect above the other sadists of the galaxy is this. He does not enjoy cruelty for its own sake. He is not the cackling torturer or the ranting executioner. He is cold, detached. Every act of suffering he commissions is calculated to create resonance, to maintain the engine of fear and obedience that drives his empire. He understands pain in a way that surpasses mere instinct. He applies it like a chemist, like a composer, like a god of ruin, carefully balancing agony and awe. It is this mastery that makes Vect untouchable. He does not need the warp. He does not wield sorcery or prophecy. He reigns through the oldest and most potent magic of all. The understanding that the memory of pain lasts longer than life, and that to own that memory is to own the soul. Asdrubael Vect is the most targeted being in Kamara, perhaps in the galaxy. Every ambitious archon, every disillusioned subordinate, every slighted homunculus has, at one time or another, considered the allure of the unthinkable. To kill the supreme overlord. And yet, Vect remains, not merely alive, but untouchable. His continued survival is not luck, nor brute strength, It is calculated inevitability, an orchestration so intricate that even failure plays into his hands. Every attempt on his life only strengthens his legend. Every blade drawn against him becomes another piece in a larger performance of terror. There have been hundreds, perhaps thousands, of assassination attempts, each one more elaborate than the last. Entire cabals have vanished trying to breach his inner sanctum. Subtle poisons, time-delayed soul flayers, sentient bombs disguised as concubines, neural disruptors woven into gifts, all tried, all failed. But these are not just failures. They are stories Vect allows to circulate, because each one reinforces the illusion that he is not merely hard to kill, but impossible. Some say Vect uses decoys, perfect clones crafted by the homunculi, indistinguishable from his true self. Others whisper that he has fragmented his consciousness into psychically sealed reliquaries across Camera, and that what one sees is never really him. There are those who believe he has already died 1,000 times, and each death was rehearsed, constructed, and broadcast to make the city remember who rules them. It doesn't matter which story is true. The uncertainty is the point. The most infamous attempt came from within the cabal of the Obsidian Rose. A collective of archons forged a temporary alliance, pooling resources, artifacts, and centuries of hate. They coordinated a synchronized strike on multiple fronts. An assault on the Darkspire itself, paired with psychic interference to blind his seers, and a homunculus-engineered plague released into the pleasure pits below. For 3 heartbeats, it seemed like they might succeed. But then the streets of their own districts began to scream. Vect hadn't stopped the plot. He had permitted it. He allowed it to flourish, to grow fat on its own arrogance. And when the noose was drawn tight around him, he yanked it, not around his own neck, but around theirs. The archons were captured and displayed in iron coffins throughout the city, kept alive and conscious as their own cabals turned on one another in a frenzy of betrayal. Vect had rehearsed the coup, had scripted it. He had turned their rebellion into theater, and the city, hungry for spectacle, devoured every moment. Even the homunculi, who pride themselves on understanding death and cheating it, tread lightly around Vect. They know he has secrets even they dare not contemplate. It is said he once allowed himself to be killed by a coven, only to awaken inside one of their soul vaults, having already corrupted their inner sanctum from within. The entire coven was erased. No screams, no remains, only silence, and a single rune left behind, a black heart. Vect's ability to absorb betrayal and repurpose it into myth is without equal. He doesn't just survive, he benefits from every attempt. The message is clear. He knows you. He expected you, and he already turned your ambition into a lesson for the rest. The failed assassin becomes another layer of fear, another warning etched into the city's memory. And what's more unnerving is that Vect doesn't always kill those who try. Sometimes he elevates them. Sometimes the would-be traitor finds themselves inexplicably spared, promoted even. Because nothing in Camorra inspires paranoia more than mercy. What did they do to earn survival? Are they now spies? Weapons? Is Vect watching through their eyes? The survivor becomes the perfect instrument, a living question mark that destabilizes all who once trusted them. This is how Vect rules, not through brute strength, but through narrative. Through manipulation of meaning itself. Death is not his weakness, it is his canvas. And as long as his enemies draw breath, he remains immortal in a far more terrifying sense. Not because he cannot be killed, but because he has made every death that touches him part of his design. The Arcanite Council was once the iron heart of Camorra's ruling elite, a conclave of ancient, highborn archons whose power predated even the fall. They were the last remnants of a time when bloodline and tradition were law, when control over the city was determined by lineage rather than terror. To many, they were untouchable, regal, eternal, immune to the rot below. But to Asdrubael Vect, they were a diseased organ begging to be excised. Their existence was an insult to his ascension, and he would not rest until they were not merely dead, but erased from memory. What followed was not a war. It was a dissection. The council had grown complacent. While they sneered at Vect's rise from the underlevels, they failed to notice how he coiled around them like a serpent. For decades, some say centuries, Vect embedded operatives in their households, corrupted their soul vaults, and blackmailed their retainers. Every gift they accepted, every alliance they forged, Every artifact they unearthed had been touched by his shadow. He knew the rotation of their guard schedules, the passwords to their soul archives, even the breeding rituals of their pleasure slaves. They were surrounded, and they didn't even know it. When he struck, it was not with armies, it was with truth, or at least a weaponized version of it. Vect unleashed an avalanche of scandalous revelations across Kamara in a single night. Documents forged so perfectly they became real. Holovids constructed from fragments of psychic memory. Rumors surgically planted years earlier, now blossoming into full accusations. The Arcanite Council, once symbols of aloof power, were exposed as heretics, Slaneshi collaborators, genetic deviants, and worse. The city turned on them with glee. In Kamara, outrage is not moral, it is opportunistic. Rival cabals descended on the council's holdings like starving beasts. Vect offered no open support. He didn't have to. His silence was a signal. Within hours, the council's estates burned, their private fortresses breached, their guards slaughtered or bribed. Those few who escaped found every gate closed, every safe house compromised, every ally suddenly deaf. But Vect wasn't content with mere elimination. He wanted spectacle. He wanted ritual. He had the surviving members of the Arcanite Council captured and brought before a crowd of millions in the central plaza of Kamara. Not to be executed, that would have been merciful. Instead, he ordered them entombed, alive, in crystal sarcophagi of his own design, designed to keep their minds and senses intact for eternity. Their agony would be preserved like art. Each sarcophagus was embedded into the foundations of the new Tower of the Black Heart. They were made visible to all, suspended in columns of light, their faces twisted in silent screams. Vect declared that this monument was not a celebration of his power, but a warning. That nobility was not immunity, and that the future of Kamara belonged not to those who inherited power, but to those who seized it. The psychological impact was absolute. The highborn elite, those who had once viewed Vect as an upstart, bent the knee, not out of fear for their lives, but for their relevance. The culture of Kamara changed overnight. No longer was prestige derived from lineage. Now it came from utility, from violence, from fear. And Vect was the measuring rod against which all were compared. What made this moment more than political was its permanence. The fall of the Arcanite Council was not just a shift in leadership, it was a shift in reality. It redefined what power meant in Kamara. It signaled the death of the old empire and the birth of something colder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. From that day forward, Vect no longer had to speak. His city spoke for him. His enemies became fuel. And those who remembered the old ways remembered them only through the crystal faces of the council. Their eternal expressions of helplessness, reflecting the truth all Drukhari now understood. Vect had not just won. He had unwritten everything that came before him. There are monsters in Kamara, and then there are the homunculi. Twisted, ancient flesh sculptors who laugh at death and remake reality through surgical horror. They are the dark gods of the Drukhari underworld, entities so far removed from mortality that they no longer think in years, but in torments endured. Even the most sadistic archons tread carefully in their presence, offering tribute, flattery, and a wide berth. But not as Asdrubael Vect. He does not fear the homunculi. He uses them. And through his unique relationship with their covens, he has redefined the very nature of immortality and control within the Dark City. When Vect rose to power, the homunculi were scattered and aloof, cloistered in their oubliettes and flesh labs, rarely involving themselves in Kabalite politics. They traded their services in secret, acting as surgeons, assassins, and necromancers for hire. But Vect saw their true potential. He saw not just artisans of suffering, but keepers of continuity. In a culture where death stalks every moment, the homunculi offered something more valuable than fear. They offered return. Vect brokered a pact with the most influential covens, starting with the Prophets of Flesh and the Dark Creed. He offered them unrestricted access to captives, ancient technologies recovered from real space raids, and political autonomy in exchange for a simple service: his eternity. The homunculi would safeguard his soul, preserve his memories, and reconstruct his body in the event of death. In return, Vect would grant them the resources to pursue their blasphemous art to its highest expression. But the relationship didn't end at preservation. It evolved into alliance, then into dependence, and finally into something far darker: symbiosis. The homunculi became the architects of Vect's invincibility, and in turn, Vect became their ultimate patron. He elevated them from subterranean boogeymen to near-divine entities within Kamara's hierarchy. Their creations, grotesques, racks, pain engines, are no longer curiosities or battlefield tools. They are symbols of Vect's reach. Every homunculi monstrosity stalking the alleys is a whisper that even death bends knee to the supreme overlord. It is even rumored that Vect allowed himself to be killed voluntarily, just to test the resurrection protocols devised by the covens. According to legend, he returned not just intact, but enhanced, his new form bearing subtle modifications that defied biology and mocked divinity. Some claim he no longer exists as a single body, but as a distributed entity across multiple clones, each one unaware of whether they are the original or a contingency. The homunculi know the truth, and they keep it, sealed in soul vaults so ancient they remember the fall. Yet even this alliance is built on a knife's edge. Vect does not trust the homunculi. He contains them. He understands that while they crave experimentation and suffering, they also crave relevance. He gives them purpose. He ensures that their obsessions are channeled, not scattered. And in return, they are given more than just flesh. They are given fear. The fear of being excluded from Vect's favor, from his endless wars and his unending patronage. For a homunculus, obscurity is worse than death. It is through this calculated partnership that Vect has accomplished the unthinkable. He has turned the ungovernable into infrastructure. The homunculi covens, once untethered horrors, now act as a clandestine intelligence network, medical corps, black site guardians, and metaphysical engineers for the Black Heart. They do not serve him in the traditional sense. They invest in him, because as long as Vect reigns, their art has infinite canvas. And perhaps the greatest horror of all is this: the homunculi, for all their pride, respect him. They, who have reshaped reality itself, see in Vect not a rival, but a kindred force. A mind that understands that immortality is not about avoiding death, it is about controlling the story told after you die. Vect has not just conquered Kamara. With the homunculi by his side, he has conquered even the end. Kamara is a city built on blood, and Asdrubael Vect is its architect of attrition. While others see war as a path to victory or conquest, Vect sees it as maintenance, a necessary function of control. In the Dark City, peace is not the absence of violence, it is stagnation. And Vect will not allow stagnation to rot his empire from within. Instead, he orchestrates perpetual conflict like a symphony of razor wire, measured, predictable, and always within his grasp. The cabals must war, the witch cults must slaughter, the homunculi must dissect. It is not just tradition, it is policy. Vect has engineered Kamara into a perfect engine of controlled chaos. No faction, no cabal, no witch cult grows too powerful without finding itself embroiled in a sudden vendetta, a mysterious betrayal, or an unexpectedly disastrous raid. These are not random events. They are induced. Vect maintains an ever-evolving equilibrium, ensuring that every player remains just strong enough to be useful, but never strong enough to become dangerous. He balances power like a chemist balances toxins. Too much ambition, and he injects failure. Too much success, and he introduces paranoia. The genius lies in how subtle it is. He never gives direct orders. Instead, he whispers through intermediaries, manipulates intelligence, leaks half-truths. A witch cult receives evidence of a slight from a rival. A cabal hears rumors of treason among its lieutenants. A homunculus receives a unique artifact that just so happens to be linked to a soul debt from another coven. These seemingly minor provocations explode into open conflict, drawing in allies, mercenaries, and spectators, just as Vect intended. War, for the Drukhari, is catharsis, but Vect ensures that it never becomes resolution. There's always a new grudge to settle, always a new insult to avenge. He ensures that every cabal is both predator and prey, locked in a cycle of retribution that consumes resources and attention. In doing so, he keeps them focused on each other, not on him. They forget that the supreme overlord is the one threading their violence like beads on a chain. Some have tried to resist. Coalitions have been formed, secret alliances signed in blood, bold strategies laid to finally bring peace, or, more dangerously, unity. But unity is the one sin Vect will not forgive. These pacts are always exposed, often at the worst possible moment for their architects. A hidden rival reveals the plan mid-assault. A key lieutenant betrays the cause for a seat at Vect's table. The coalition collapses, and the survivors learn that rebellion does not end in death. It ends in irrelevance. Vect's manipulation of warfare extends beyond Camera. He arranges real space raids not just for sustenance, but as strategic exercises in internal politics. Two rival cabals may be coincidentally assigned overlapping targets, ensuring that their victory comes at the other's expense. A witch cult may be granted the exclusive right to harvest from a prized battlefield, igniting jealousies and vendettas that spiral for decades. Each act of violence ripples inward, creating conflict that feeds back into the city like blood into a predator's mouth. Even his own cabal, the Black Heart, is not exempt. Vect encourages infighting among his lieutenants. Promotions are earned through betrayal, demotions enforced through public humiliation. His leadership is not a shield from conflict, but a crucible. Those who serve him do so with the understanding that survival is its own reward, and that loyalty is proven through the pain of others. It would be a mistake to view this endless war as a flaw in the system. It is the system. It ensures that innovation thrives, that weakness is culled, and that ambition never slumbers. In Camera, peace is the domain of corpses. War is the heartbeat, and Vect is the pulse that keeps it from faltering. What's most chilling is how seamless it all feels. The factions of the Dark City believe they are free, believe they choose their battles, their enemies, their moments of betrayal. But the truth is far more horrifying. They are puppets on strings so fine they resemble autonomy. And Vect, from atop his spire, is the grand manipulator of their delusions. The galaxy believes it is ruled by giants, the Imperium with its God-Emperor, the demonic tides of chaos, the ravenous hive fleets, and the cold logic of the Necrons. But lurking just beneath that titanic theater is Asdrubael Vect, who moves not through brute force or galactic conquest, but through subtlety and shadow. While others raise monuments of steel and bone, Vect raises questions. The kind that make planetary governors tremble in their sleep, and inquisitors purge entire sectors just to quiet their doubts. Camera may be hidden in the webway, but Vect's influence bleeds into real space like poison into a wound. Vect does not simply raid worlds. He targets them. Surgically, methodically, with an understanding of cultural significance and strategic vulnerability that would make even the most hardened Tactica Imperialis scholar weep with admiration or despair. He doesn't attack because he needs resources. He attacks because they need stability. And by robbing them of it, he injects fear into the very bloodstream of civilization. Entire agri-worlds have vanished in the night, their population stolen away not by war, but by silence. Shrine worlds have been desecrated with symbols designed not merely to offend, but to unravel faith itself. Vect once orchestrated a raid on a forge world not to steal its technology, but to leave behind a singular unknown artifact, one that drove the Mechanicus into theological schism for decades. This is his warfare. Not annihilation, but infection. His mastery of the webway is a critical component of this. Vect controls passages and gates that even the Eldar of the craft worlds have forgotten. His cabals can strike from nowhere, vanish into nothing, and reappear years later in an entirely different segmentum. And because no one outside of Camera fully understands how the webway works, no countermeasures ever truly last. Fortresses are built, fleets are stationed, and yet the raids continue. Because it is not about entry, it is about expectation. Vect rewrites the rhythm of danger. But it's not just the Imperium that suffers. Chaos, too, has felt the sting of the Black Heart. Vect holds no allegiance to the gods of the warp, and his raids into daemon-haunted sectors are acts of calculated disruption. He once captured a daemon prince, bound it in a soul-reactive containment shell, and used its screams as a power source for a decade-long torture engine. Not because it gave him power, but because it sent a message to both Camera and the warp. Not even gods are safe. He has meddled in the affairs of the Tau, orchestrating conflicts that collapse alliances just as they form. He has whispered to orc war bosses, redirecting entire WOGs with carefully planted Xenos relics and false visions. Even the Tyranids, mindless though they seem, have been manipulated, not through direct control, but through steering their prey worlds into carefully seeded sectors, setting up kill zones that feed both Comrade's appetites and Vect's strategic goals. Perhaps the most insidious display of his reach was the subtle collapse of the Lysatri sector. A once thriving imperial region, Lysatri saw decades of inexplicable failures, psyker madness, technological breakdowns, warp storms that ebbed and flowed with unnatural timing. No Drakari raids were reported, none officially. But years later, inquisitorial agents recovered fragmented intelligence hinting at a singular guiding will behind the region's disintegration. A sigil etched into the cortex of a rogue astropath, matching no known Xenos script, but eerily similar to markings found deep in the lower vaults of Comera. The Black Heart had bled that sector dry without ever drawing a sword. Vect's power does not lie in the size of his armies, but in the way he chooses where and when to act. Every raid, every manipulation, every whisper in the dark is not random. It is design. It is a demonstration that even in a galaxy of endless war, there is room for intent. That fear does not need to come with banners or orbital bombardments. Sometimes it comes with silence, with things missing, with memories corrupted. No throne in the galaxy bears Vect's name, and yet his shadow falls on all of them. Because the true terror is not that he could take their crowns. It's that he doesn't need to. The galaxy is already a stage, and Vect's will is the unseen script being followed, line by bloody line. Across the galaxy, there are minds that have shaped empires, broken worlds, and rewritten the future with thought alone. Roboute Guilliman, the Avenging Sun, resurrected a dying imperium with logistics and vision. Aban, the Despoiler, has waged millennium-spanning wars with apocalyptic cunning. Trazyn the Infinite hoards histories and secrets that could end civilizations. Even the Hive Mind, vast and unknowable, directs the endless hunger of the tyrannid swarm with perfect, horrifying efficiency. Yet among these titanic intellects, one name whispers with a different kind of power: Asdrubael Vect. Not for what he's built, but for what he's unmade. Vect is not a general in the traditional sense. He does not command legions in open war. He has no need of cathedrals, fortresses, or banners. What he commands is perception. And in the theater of the 41st millennium, perception is reality. While Guilliman moves armies across stars, Vect moves rumors through the webway. Where Abaddon breaks gates with his Black Legion, Vect opens them with a whisper, then watches as others tear themselves apart, trying to guess why. His strategic genius is not an overwhelming force, but an omnidirectional manipulation. While most great minds play the long game, Vect plays the infinite one. Every enemy is either an asset or a mirror. Every ally is a tool or a test. He does not think in victories and defeats. He thinks in outcomes, in balance sheets of chaos and power that shift beneath the surface of events. To compare him to the generals of the Imperium or the War Masters of Chaos is to compare a shadow to a blade. You can dodge the blade. The shadow is already inside you. Take his approach to warfare. Guilliman drafts strategies that span years. Vect crafts manipulations that span generations. He doesn't just anticipate a threat, he prepares its counter, its echo, and the consequences of both, years before it emerges. Where Guilliman seeks to restore, Vect reshapes. Where Trazyn collects, Vect erases. He doesn't just know his enemies, he defines them. Some scholars of forbidden lore have theorized that Vect's intelligence is no longer even Eldari in nature. They speculate that his neural architecture has been enhanced by homunculi modification, to the point that his mind no longer works linearly. That he sees time not as a line, but as a spectrum of probabilities. If true, this would explain his uncanny ability to be several moves ahead of even the most cunning rivals. It's said he can process a betrayal before the traitor has even conceived it. Compared to the Hive Mind, an entity of near-limitless calculation, Vect still operates on a scale more intimately cruel. The Hive Mind devours because it must. Vect orchestrates devastation because it proves a point. He is a mind that weaponizes intention. Where the Hive Mind is instinctual genius, Vect is personal, and that makes him far more terrifying. Even chaos, with all its timeless schemes and demonic foresight, cannot match his discipline. The Chaos Gods are entropy incarnate, their victories often self-sabotaging. But Vect has never lost. Not because he's invulnerable, but because he never invests in a single version of reality. He diversifies his futures, plants fail-safes within fail-safes, and is always ready to lose something in order to gain everything. This is the true terror of his intellect. Vect doesn't care if you see him win. In fact, he prefers when you think you've bested him. Because in that moment, when you relax, when you believe you've escaped, you are at your most vulnerable. And then the trap closes. He does not need to be seen to be effective. He does not need to be believed to be real. His mind is an ecosystem of dominance, a system of thought that feeds off the galaxy's ignorance. And that is why no one has ever truly outmaneuvered him. Because while others play to rule, Vect plays to define the game itself. And by the time you realize you're playing by his rules, you're already part of the story he's been writing, one where he always gets the last word. Asdrubael Vect is a paradox made flesh. He is the lowborn who forged an empire, the slave who enslaved a civilization. In a culture built on chaos, he brought order through fear. In a society that worships personal excess and endless anarchy, he rules with discipline and systemic precision. The deeper one peers into the void that is Vect, the more one begins to see not a man, but a contradiction, an impossibility that somehow works. And at the center of it all lies the greatest irony. Vect, the liberator of the Gutterborn, has become the most absolute tyrant in the history of the Drukhari. He destroyed the ancient order, shattered the power of hereditary nobility, and built a new society where power is earned rather than inherited. And yet he himself is an eternal ruler, unchallengeable, enshrined as an unmovable pinnacle of the very hierarchy he once claimed to detest. He preaches ambition and encourages betrayal, yet punishes it with merciless precision. He elevates the clever, the ruthless, the adaptable, but only so far as they never threaten his throne. In Vect's world, everyone climbs, but no one ascends. This is the paradox. He gave his people the freedom to pursue their most depraved desires, but structured it so they would always remain dependent on him. They believe they are wild, ungoverned, free to indulge their lusts and rages, but they do so within walls he has built, along paths he has designed. The Drukhari think themselves masters of suffering, but in truth, they are puppets in a pageant of agony, choreographed by one man whose strings stretch across eternity. Even his own philosophy is a contradiction. The Drukhari reject the worship of gods, yet Vect has become a god in all but name. He is omnipresent, immortal, unchallengeable. His image is burned into the architecture of Comora, whispered in every alley, etched into the skin of tortured slaves. He is not revered in a religious sense, but he is obeyed with the same fevered devotion. He has replaced faith with fear, and in doing so, achieved a kind of dark divinity. And yet, he is afraid. Not of death, not of failure, but of irrelevance. For all his power, Vect knows that even he is not truly eternal. Comorai's hunger is infinite, and the Drukhari psyche is a storm of constant rebellion. The more he suppresses chaos, the more chaos must eventually erupt. He is not standing atop a throne, he is balancing on a knife's edge. Should he falter even for a moment, the city would not mourn, it would feast. That knowledge haunts him. It fuels his need to control every narrative, every betrayal, every heartbeat of the city. He must remain indispensable, not because he loves power, but because power is the only thing that keeps him alive. And so he is trapped by his own creation, a world that requires him, but will one day destroy him if he ever stops being necessary. Some whisper that he has grown weary, that he sees the futility in trying to shape a culture so inherently broken. Others claim he has begun crafting a successor, not to inherit his rule, but to fail in his image, so the city may always remember that only he could ever truly master it. Still others believe he plans something greater, to ascend beyond Comora, to become something even the warp cannot swallow. But perhaps the truth is simpler and darker. Perhaps Vect is not trying to escape his paradox. Perhaps he is the paradox, an entity whose power stems from his own internal contradiction. He is the tyranny that justifies itself through the chaos it controls, the fear that frees, the death that sustains life, the silence at the center of endless screams. And that is what makes him so uniquely terrifying, because he doesn't just rule through pain, he rules through meaning, through the very structure of what it means to exist in the Dark City. To oppose him is not merely to fight a man, it is to reject the only logic the Drukhari have left. And that is a battle few are brave enough, or mad enough to even consider. There are tyrants whose names are etched into history through conquest. There are monsters who rule through terror, whose legacies are measured in bones and ash. And then there is Asdrubael Vect, whose dominion is so complete, so insidious, that his enemies don't even realize they're obeying him until it's far too late. His legacy is not a battlefield or a tomb. It is a system, a way of life, a worldview carved into the very soul of Camara and whispered into the nightmares of a galaxy that still doesn't understand how deeply his shadow has fallen. What makes Vect the most dangerous person in the galaxy is not his cruelty or his intellect or even his power. It's his vision. His belief that control must be total but invisible, that suffering must have structure, that chaos must be harvested like a crop and used to maintain order. He has taken a race on the brink of extinction, hunted by the warp, fractured by betrayal, addicted to agony, and turned them into a weapon so precise it can strike without being seen. A cancer so quiet it thrives beneath every throne in the galaxy. He has made himself indispensable, not because of what he offers, but because of what he denies. Without Vect, Camara collapses. The cabals devour each other, the homunculi spiral into self-destruction. The witch cults turn their arenas inward. But as long as he lives, there is rhythm to the madness, purpose to the bloodshed. A future, however grim, for a people that should have long since destroyed themselves. And yet, there is no peace in his reign, no contentment. Only the slow grinding of inevitability. His enemies multiply, his tools grow more unpredictable. And deep within the webway, other powers stir, some ancient, some newly risen, who may one day challenge even the Black Heart. But if they do, they must remember. Vect has already considered them. He has dreamed their rebellions, he has weighed their victories, and somewhere in the dark a plan is already unfolding. To know Vect is to understand that evil is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits, sometimes it wears a mask of order and offers you a choice, only to ensure every path leads back to him. There is a moment, somewhere in the life of every Drukhari, when they realize the truth, that they have never been free, that the choices they thought were theirs were always someone else's design, that the rage, the ambition, the endless torment, they were all parts in a script written long before they were born. That moment, when it comes, is quiet. A witch holding the throat of a rival she once loved, a Cabalite soldier staring into the eyes of a commander who just betrayed him. A homunculus, centuries deep into madness, realizing that every experiment he's ever conducted has been silently subsidized by a power he cannot name. And when that moment hits, the realization is like a second death. Vect has always been here. This is Vect's truest legacy, not his cabal, not his empire, but the internalization of his authority. He has become not just a ruler, but a condition. A psychological fixture so deeply embedded in the Drukhari soul that rebellion has become performance, and autonomy a lie told for comfort. His genius lies not in conquest, but in encoding himself into behavior. Even in the minds of those who hate him, Vect lives rent-free, his cold hand shaping thought, reflex, and instinct. There are entire witch cults who train not in opposition to the cabals, but in fear of what Vect would think of their choreography. There are architects in Camara who do not build for utility or aesthetics, but for optics, to demonstrate loyalty, relevance, or at least invisibility to the supreme overlord. The very streets shift based on rumors of his attention. Some say he walks unseen among the masses, that he possesses dozens of bodies and changes them like masks, observing, judging, cataloging. Whether this is true doesn't matter. The belief that it might be is what keeps Camara breathing. Vect's legacy is also linguistic. Language itself in the Dark City has evolved around him. There are idioms now in Low Camarite that translate to "as planned by the Black Heart" or "in the shadow of the throne," used to describe events too complex or ironic to be coincidence. To speak of fate in Camara is to speak of Vect, because he is fate. His influence is the metaphysical weather, unseen but always felt, shifting allegiances like tides and breaking lives like waves. Even the young, those freshly risen from real space raids or born in the breeding vats of pleasure dens, are taught his name like a prayer. Not one of reverence, but one of inevitability. Stories are whispered to them, parables of rivals who rose too quickly or rebels who vanished without explanation. These stories serve not only as warning, but as education. They teach that the only true path to survival is not to be strong, but to be useful to Vect's order. Or, failing that, to be unremarkable enough to be ignored. And yet, beneath the fear, there is something stranger. Something dangerously close to admiration. In the darkest corners of Camera, where philosophers carve their thoughts into living flesh and dreamers dose themselves with warp-tainted memories, there are those who claim that Vect has done the impossible. That he has perfected the Drukhari condition. That in a universe where gods are mad, where imperiums crumble and chaos seeps through every crack, only Vect has created a system that endures. These heretical thinkers argue that Vect has created a form of order through cruelty, that he has balanced sadism with survival in a way that no other faction of the Eldar race has managed. Craftworlders isolate, Exodites regress, Corsairs dissipate, but the Drukhari persist, not in spite of their depravity, but because Vect structured it, weaponized it, commodified it. He made pain into ritual, he made betrayal into currency, and he made survival the highest art form. Even among the soul-thirsted, the desperate, and the doomed, there is a grim sort of gratitude. Because without Vect, there would be no Camera. There would be only howling madness in the warp, souls devoured by she who thirsts, and memory lost to time. Vect has preserved something, even if it is monstrous. And that something, that sick, beautiful, eternal theater of pain, is all the Drukhari have left. And so his legacy is whispered not just in fear, but in resignation. A homunculus carves his sigil into a lab wall, just in case someone's watching. A Cabalite warrior, moments from death, smiles because he knows his life and death alike serve a purpose in Vect's story. Even the rebellious know their defiance is part of the machine. It has to be. Otherwise, why would they still be alive? This is how Vect wins. Not with armies, not with prophecy, but by making everyone need him, even those who hate him. And that, perhaps, is the greatest cruelty of all. To live in Camera is to become someone else, not by choice, not all at once, but slowly, inch by inch, betrayal by betrayal, survival after survival. And at the core of that transformation, like the gravitational pull of a black star, is Asdrubael Vect. He doesn't just dictate law or punish rebellion, he warps identity, until who you are is no longer measured by memories or loyalties, but by your relation to him. In time, the Drukhari cease to be individuals. They become functions of Vect's will, performers in a horror that never ends, and prisoners who forget they were ever free. A Cabalite warrior begins their journey with fire in their veins, vengeance on their lips, and a desperate hunger to climb. But over decades, if they live that long, something shifts. They no longer kill to ascend. They kill to be seen. They no longer fight to escape the gutter. They fight to maintain visibility in a hierarchy so fluid, so complex, that disappearing from relevance is as fatal as a splinter round to the heart. And in that shift, the warrior is lost. What remains is a weapon honed not for purpose, but for theater. And the audience always is Vect. Homunculi, those ancient architects of torment, are not immune either. In their pursuit of pain, they once competed only with each other. Now, they compete for a whisper of Vect's approval. A knowing glance, a cryptic message from a faceless servant. They reshape their flesh not merely to defy death, but to remain interesting in his eyes. To fall out of favor is to be starved of influence. And for a homunculus, irrelevance is the one thing worse than death. It is boredom. Even the witch cults, once pure in their devotion to violence and spectacle, now structure their rites around timing, rumor, and anticipation of the supreme overlord's attention. They do not simply entertain the masses of Camera. They audition for power. The arenas become churches. The blood spilled is sacrament. And the cults do not pray, but they perform with a desperation that serves the same purpose: to be noticed, to be judged, to matter. Vect doesn't command this. He never needs to. He simply is. And in being, he shapes. His presence is so overwhelming, so silently total, that it rewrites behavior. Not just on the streets and in the spires, but inwardly, in the most intimate spaces of identity. Drukhari stop asking who they are, they ask only what role they play. And once they find it, they cling to it like a lifeline, even as it strangles them. This is the insidious brilliance of Vect's reign. He has turned survival into ideology, into religion. Not a religion of gods or spirits, but one of position and narrative. In Camorra, your life's value is not measured by virtue, but by your fit within the story being told. And that story always is Vect's. But this system, like all great lies, feeds on truth. The truth that Camorra is dying, not in fire or collapse, but in spirit. Its people no longer dream, they scheme. They no longer build for the future. They maneuver for the next 10 minutes. Hope has no meaning here, not because of despair, but because of exhaustion. Everyone is tired, not from pain. Pain is familiar. It's the performance that drains them. The constant pretending, the endless recalculation of alliances, gestures, expressions, motives. Every smile is a weapon, every glance a gamble, and behind it all, Vect watches. And yet no one stops, because to stop is to fall. And to fall in Camorra is to vanish. Those who do fall, those who fail, displease, net, or simply cease to entertain, are not always killed. Sometimes they are erased more subtly. Their names are stricken from databanks, their sigils removed from tower walls, their allies suddenly forget they existed. These are known as the nulls, souls whom Vect has declared non-canonical. And in a culture where survival is measured by significance, being forgotten is the most exquisite punishment imaginable. Some whisper that Vect himself has walked this path, that he once was a null, a slave so broken, so beneath notice, that the only way he could survive was to become indispensable. Others claim he retains memories of those who have been erased, that he carries their names in a private ledger, as if to say, "Only I remember you now." Whether this is true or not is irrelevant. The fear that it might be is what matters. Even the architecture of Camorra reflects this tyranny of presence. Buildings rise and fall based on utility, fashion, and favor. Spires that once housed cabals of legend now stand hollow, their glass-black walls covered in creeping bone vines. Statues crumble overnight, bridges vanish without record. History here is not written. It is curated by Vect. What survives is what he deems worthy. What fades is what he finds tedious. The city itself has become a mind, his mind. Its memory is selective, its structure recursive, its soul infected with a logic that none dare oppose, because it is the only logic left. So what happens to a civilization where the only moral is survival and the only god is attention? What happens when the soul of a people is replaced with an algorithm of fear? You get Camorra. You get a culture so elegant in its horror, so refined in its cruelty, that it forgets it was ever alive. And you get a ruler who doesn't just command obedience, he defines it. Vect has done more than conquer, he has colonized the soul. And in the end, there may be no rebellion, no uprising, no final dramatic collapse, only the endless hum of a system that no longer needs its master to function. A machine of shadows and screams that runs on silence, on obedience, on the memory of a name that no one dares to say too loudly. So the next time you hear of a world lost in a single night, of a rebellion crushed before it began, of an empire unraveling for reasons no one can name, consider the possibility that it was never yours to hold, that you were never meant to win, that Asdrubael Vect, supreme overlord of Camorra, did not need to raise a hand, because he already owned the outcome. And if you've made it this far, if the story of Vect has chilled you, intrigued you, or opened your eyes to the true scale of darkness in the 41st millennium, then join us. Subscribe to this channel for more journeys into the shadows of Warhammer 40k. There are more monsters waiting, and none of them ever sleep.